Data-Centric security in the age of GenAI. So I want to welcome James Rice, VP, Data Security and Analytics of Protegrity. Welcome.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, everyone. First off, appreciate you joining. I know everyone's favorite topic when it comes to data, security, audit, and compliance, right? A real fun topic. My name is James Rice. I'm responsible for really our product strategy, product vision when it comes to how to leverage both security and analytics. You know, I have the pleasure of actually being able to travel the world talking to both a lot of data teams as well as a lot of security teams. And my goal really is simple. How do we help an organization empower the business with more data? Maybe a little different from most security vendors, right? Really, our focus is not necessarily on the security side, while important, but on the data consumption side. And I'm going to apologize now. I'm not sure if it made it into the agenda, but this is the audience participation session. So too late, no running for the doors. I asked them to lock it. You're all stuck in here. And I'll try and keep it fairly simple. Who in here can raise their hand? It's a little harder for some of you than I would have hoped, because the questions will get a little more difficult as we go, but we'll see how it goes. You know, I mentioned that I travel the world really kind of talking to data and analytics teams, and I'm curious, who in here has ever had a security, audit, or compliance person slow down your ability to get data? Who here has ever had it completely stop, like you just couldn't even get it, and they just said, no way, no how? Okay, double hands over here. Okay, so we've got a lot of that going on sometimes. Why is that? It's because there's a really, really important challenge. There's a challenge of the usability of data on one hand and the risk of data on the other. And those are two very strong, very opposing forces. But there's valid reasons for both sides of this, right? You know what you're interested in. It's all the sessions that have been here. It's data analytics, lots of AI, lots of machine learning. You've got all these new interaction models with data, and you want to be able to use it. Yet, unfortunately, some of the most important data is the sensitive data, right? It may not be the biggest bulk of your data ecosystem, but it's one of the more valuable pieces of your data. And so on the security side, though, there really is a lot of reasons behind this. There's industry regulations, there's data sovereignty requirements, right? There's the risk of data breach, and now we talk about AI models, and we all know we don't necessarily want to feed a lot of sensitive information into the public cloud as well. These are just two opposing forces, again, that just keep like banging their heads against each other. And one of the things that I think is like really interesting about this is that we can all agree, whether you are in business, IT, security, data, that being able to consume data is actually one of the most important things we can do in the next well, I was going to say 6 to 18 months, but maybe it's next 6 to 18 hours, right? I mean, it's like we want this stuff now and we want to be taking advantage of it. And the struggle with that really is all of the security, all of the audit, and all of the compliance. But we do all agree, data needs to be moved and consumed and analyzed and shared and trusted and internal and external and local and global. How do we do this, right? That right there, data has to be local and global at the same time. That's a hard problem to solve. But there are a lot of vendors that talk about data security. We hear this all the time. Yet what's really interesting is that while this is a 2023 stat, about $180 billion was spent globally in 2023. I looked this up, 2024, we were about $200 billion globally spent on security. This is on average about a 14 to 15% increase that happens year over year on security spend. Yet, at the exact same time, those compromises raise at an alarming rate. So let me ask, who here is in financial services? Okay, keep your hands up if you don't mind. Transportation? We adding transportation to it? What about retail? I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but you're the worst in this whole conversation, right? Like, yours have doubled year over year. Who here is already in the cloud? Who here is thinking about going to the cloud? Again, a little bit of a spoiler alert, 80% of these issues happen in the cloud as well. So we've spent billions and billions of dollars as a community trying to solve this problem, but why haven't we solved it yet? And if we look at what's on the slide, it's kind of easy to just take a look here and see, well, what is it that we're actually spending money on today? We're spending money on things like application security. We're spending money on access controls. We're spending money to protect the infrastructure, protect the network, protect the cloud. But what are these things not protecting? They're not protecting the data itself. They surround the data with layers and layers and layers of security, but what does that actually do? That adds more friction for every one of you in this room to be able to get that data and be able to do something with it. And so what we really want to think about here is how do we change this paradigm? How do we go from surrounding data with security to doing something different, to really being able to have a more modern approach to data security that will be able to allow you to take advantage of all of the data analytics, all of the AI, all of the machine learning that you want to consume. Because in the era of in the age of GenAI, I think as my title was called, this problem is going to get a whole lot harder. Think about what those security controls are doing today. What does access control do? Access control says yes or no if you can have the data. What does masking do? It redacts data and throws some of that information away. Essentially what we're saying here is you have kind of two choices today on your data. You either get rid of it, redact it, remove it from the conversation, or you expose it. Neither of those are great, right? You want more data, more quality, more completeness of data. Security teams want more secure, compliant data. So both of those are a problem in the GenAI world, because when we look at it from a GenAI perspective, there's really two ways to think about this slide. It's one, there's a lot of pre-runtime stuff that has to happen with sensitive data to train a model, to maybe do some fine-tuning. But then there's a lot of runtime conversation as well. The runtime conversations start at the users. Are they entering things that they shouldn't be? Are we pulling data out of our core systems that is sensitive that we're going to then maybe even feed in a RAG perspective up into a public model that's going to expose that to the public vendor? And once all that's said and done, and before we pass it back to the end user, are we going to pass them something that they shouldn't be looking at as well? The point is there's a lot of opportunity, but what does that really mean? It means that there's a lot more users than there were before of your data. And I like to think about this almost in a Power BI model, because there's more users, the data's more dynamic, right? There's more unstructured data. In a Power BI model today, you get to be pretty curated. You get to say, here's the data. Generally, somebody can pull some levers here and there, but ultimately what they're going to be fed is just filtered data of what you're looking at. That all gets thrown out the window here when it comes to GenAI. And I was on stage and at the Snowflake conference about a year ago, and I don't know if everybody remembers about a year ago, Snowflake was not having the best time right now because there were some issues going on with their data breach and the security that had happened there. The CISO was on stage, and so talk about the one person at Snowflake that was probably having the worst day out of everybody. But he was on stage and he asked a simple question, and I'll ask you the exact same question he asked that audience. How many people here know every file they have on their SharePoint, every file you have access to? I actually appreciate the honesty here, because occasionally somebody will raise their hand, right, trying to be that overachiever. I know everything that I've got, so I appreciate your honesty. Of course we don't know all of the systems and all of the files that we have access to on our SharePoint. That's an impossible task. But guess who does know about all the files that are on SharePoint? GenAI. So if you point GenAI at it, it's going to know that information. And so now if I start querying, asking questions about customers, who knows if it's going to start spitting back information that's loaded in some file somewhere that the model got trained on that I didn't even know about. Right? There's a lot more concerns when it comes to this, because with more users, more unstructured data, more dynamic data in motion, this is something that, quite honestly, traditional security models don't handle very well. Traditional security models are about building walls and keeping bad guys out. The walls are done. The data's everywhere. It's flowing in and out, and we need to be able to address that. And so, enough gloom and doom, right? How do we address that? And I would challenge that there's really two things that we need to think about here. There's a paradigm of looking at data security both from a risk and a consumption perspective. A risk perspective, maybe it's kind of easy from a classification discussion. We all know that things like credit card numbers and social insurance numbers and dates of birth and different PII is highly sensitive, and it varies, right, in the sensitivity of that data on how you want to use it. But then we really need to think about the consumption of that data, because let me ask a question, and you know what, I'm going to apologize. I told you I was going to keep this easy and just make you raise your hand. So please, when you're filling out your survey, don't say that guy James lied to me when he was on stage and blah, blah, blah. They'll never invite me back. But I'll still keep this easy. What's your most sensitive pieces of data? Shout out a couple examples for me. What is the most highly sensitive data that you have in your organization? Patient data. SIN numbers. I'm sorry? Client information. Driver's license, passport numbers, credit card numbers, right? The list goes on and on and on. And so I appreciate that because, again, all of those have vastly different consumption needs. But let's also take maybe one example of that. Let's take a look at the SIN, right? The social insurance number. If I want to run a machine learning model that needs to be able, I'm going to just assume I'm a financial services organization for a second. I'm going to run a machine learning model or an AI model, and what I want to be able to do is look at all the transactional data based on this user's accounts, and so I need the SIN to be able to correlate all of the accounts that this user has so that I can know all the transactions that they performed so that I can do marketing analytics. So now, how many people, though, in your organization, including that AI model, need access to your SIN in the clear? How many people, percentage-wise? 1%. Percentage, though. High percentage, low percentage? Very low percentage. Sometimes I hear the answer of nobody. Like, why does anybody need to have that? And this is exactly the conversation. What we're saying here is that it's not the SIN that's important. It's the referential integrity of that number that's important, because all the AI model cares about is that I have a unique number that will always identify James. And whether that's 431471802 or 123456789 doesn't really matter. The model just needs the referential integrity of that number. And so when I talk about needing consumption of the data, that's the paradigm we need to be thinking about. How many people need this information in the clear? Very, very few. So then I would argue, if that's the case, why are we spending so much time fighting 99% of the problem? Because 99% of the time, no one needs access to that information. Yet, with traditional security models, that's exactly what you do. You're sitting here saying, well, hold on, can James have credit card number? No. Can James have SIN? No. Can he have passport or driver's license or client data or whatever? No, 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 no. And this is why I think security teams become the team of no. And what we want to do is not be the team of no. So let's invert that problem. Hold on. If only 1% of the organization needs it, then why are we not thinking about our security in a little bit of a different way and inverting the paradigm? Because first, let me be clear. All versions of security are important. This is a defense in-depth strategy, right? There are valid reasons for everything that your organization is doing today from a security perspective. But when we look at it in that context that we just talked about, we can now start to invert the problem because I would assume, based on all the information that was thrown out, could we all agree that SIN is high risk but low consumption? Sorry, low clear text consumption, right? So then let's do something different with that. Why do we spend 99% of our effort trying to swat people away from getting the SIN? Instead, what you can do is invert the model and embed the protection into the data itself. So let's use that example. If I'm taking a SIN, and sorry, so thank you for inviting an American on stage. This is all American information here on the screen. This is not my social security number, but close enough. Now, what are these data-centric security and data protection models doing for us? Well, first, from a masking perspective, it's redacting that data. But again, there's valid use cases for this, right? What happens if I'm a customer service rep, James has just called me up on the phone and said, hey, I need to get into my accounts and ask some questions. What's one question I might ask to validate who James is? What's the last 4 digits of your SIN? So great, masking has a perfectly valid reason to be here. But does that help a machine learning model? Does that help an AI model that now wants to correlate on all of James's transactional data? Absolutely not, because I can't correlate on just the last 4 digits. Those are not going to be unique to anybody. So this is really where, again, you have to start thinking about this in the context of not just the risk of the data, but the consumption needs of it, because while the customer service rep can use mass data, that machine learning model wants de-identified data, or my favorite word, it took me a while to be able to say it, and it's been a long day, so pseudonymized data. Pseudonymized data is really saying, okay, let's take that number, let's rip out all the sensitivity of that number, but still maintain the referential integrity, because this is a back and forth conversation. If I convert 214204707, it'll always become 504710734 and vice versa, right? It's reversible back and forth. Now, in the US, at least, from an anonymization perspective, if you take just the first 3 characters, you actually can generally know where I was born and where I came from, right? So you can start to anonymize data around that as well. Or you just generate completely fake synthetic data. So these are the concepts behind data-centric security that is no longer surrounding your data with security, but instead embedding security into the data itself. Because now let's take this example. If I had that social security or social insurance number, running around all of my systems, that means I have PII everywhere. What happens if I take that pseudonymized data and run it around all of my systems? Well, guess what? GDPR, the EU courts have upheld, that's not an issue, right? PCI DSS has done the same with credit cards. We have customers doing this exact same thing with right to erasure for Law 25 that says, hey, let's think about Law 25, right to erasure. I could call in and say, you need to forget everything that you know about me. Guess what that means? You just have to throw away a bunch of good, useful information that could feed your models. Or you could irreversibly pseudonymize that data so you could never get back to it being mine, but you get to keep all the data that surrounds it and really kind of understand what it means for your organization and how you want to use it. One other example I like to use is date of birth, and so now I'll flip from being a financial services customer or company, and I'll be a healthcare company. Let's say I wanted to run a machine learning model to predict healthcare rates, and I was going to use this date of birth. Well, how old would that make me? 44, 45 years old? But what happens if I shove a pseudonymized data into that machine learning model? How old would that make me? 21? Ooh, actually. Yes, if you were going to run my insurance rates, please use that pseudonymized data. I would much rather pay American insurance rates as a 21-year-old than I would as a 44 or 45-year-old. But that's only good for me and not good for you. Right? The point here is that this is a fit-for-purpose conversation. There is not one way to protect data that is the silver bullet that's going to address all of the concerns that your organization has. Instead, it is a need to look at the risk versus the consumption of that data to apply the right model or the right protection based on your business use case. So let's walk through one simple example. This is what data looks like sitting in all of your systems. Now, somebody, when I was at the security conference the other day, thought they could be a heckler and said, well, no, it's encrypted. I have all of that encrypted. Well, hold on, let's think about what database encryption does. It's a light switch that's on and off. It encrypts the whole database. So if somebody ran off with your database file, yeah, you're okay. But what about when that DBA logs into the system? They have full access to the system. They can see this raw data sitting in your data stores, for example. So the conversation here is really to say, first, at rest, it's really recommended to de-identify that data at its core. This is a true zero trust, least privilege model, because now I don't have socials or dates of birth or credit cards running around all my systems. I have referential tokens for that data. So first and foremost, the data is a lot more secure. Then there are definitely users who need that information. Right? So you've got to be able to give it back to them. So a lot of this, again, is a reversible conversation to be able to bring stuff back and forth. But the finance user needs something different than the customer service rep. And the customer service rep needs something different than the machine learning model. Because the machine learning model doesn't actually care if my name is Jane Doe or, how would I pronounce that? Finwee McQuaw? Right? It doesn't care. It just generally needs to know I have somebody who's about this many years old, lives in this general location, spends about this much money with us. Now I can do all sorts of analytics. And so the point behind this is by embedding security into the data, you can actually democratize this data much more quickly. You can get it in the hands of finance. You can get it in the hands of those customer service reps, or maybe more importantly, you get it in the hands of AI. You get it in the hands of machine learning. You get it in the hands of your data scientists, who today are doing what? They're spending a whole lot of time sometimes curating data sets, trying to find the right balance of data that they can feed to a model to hopefully generate the outputs that they're looking for. Sometimes only for that to be swatted back by the security team or the risk team to say, good try, but why don't you go try again? That's not good enough. You need to think of something different. This is why we end up redacting data because it's too hard, or we end up exposing data because it's too valuable. Now, I'm going to really kind of close on 2 slides here about business use case discussions around this, because there's really a valuable conversation to be had here, and the customers that we're working with are really kind of generally fall in about 5 buckets. When we're working with IT teams, for example, it's a lot of migrating data to the cloud. Who here wishes they could? Who here cannot take all of their data to the cloud because it's sensitive? Anybody having problems with that? Exactly. When we're working with CDAOs or data teams, it's about enabling real-time data sharing, right? All that discussion we were just having about get that data into the right hands of the right users at the right time. And doing that increases the innovation through additional analytics, through additional AI, through additional machine learning capabilities. When I'm talking to security professionals, what do they care about? Zero trust, least privilege, data breach, right? Help me out there. And when I'm talking to compliance people, they care about, you know what, it's really, really hard to evidence compliance with all of this stuff. So I'm going to spend just a little bit of time, and then I'll open it up for questions, because I want to walk through each one of these in a little bit of detail. Because again, I think these are super, super important, because data security, and this is what I talk to security professionals about all the time, instead of being a team of no, let's be a business value enabler, because that's ultimately what's going to happen if we can embed security into the data, because then data gets to flow more freely throughout the organization without worrying about all the laws, rules, and regulations of the lands, or about worrying about, again, getting swatted back by the team of no. So we're working with a large top 5 global bank that was on their way to AWS, had a great migration plan, all the things that they were wanting to do. And guess what happened? They got about 30% of the way in, and security audit and compliance raised their hand and said, no, I'm sorry, that's just too sensitive. You can't take that to the cloud. But this organization was saying, well, wait a minute, there's new apps I want to adopt in the cloud, there's new workloads I'm looking to do. Heck, just plain and simply, I've committed a bunch of money to AWS or Azure or GCP with my cloud commit already, and I can't fulfill that because I can't get all the workloads and all the data there that I want. Enter data-centric security, which by embedding protection into the data, this bank was able to get the sign-off from security, audit, and compliance to be able to move that data to the cloud. And I'm going to go one step further because this is one of my favorite examples. They were actually able to prove to the Swiss government, I think we can all agree that the Swiss government is pretty particular about their banking data, right? They were able to prove to the Swiss government that they could pick up banking data, move it out of Switzerland, move it to the US, and even if the US government compelled them, because we all know the US government's trying to be pretty compelling right now about some things, even if the US government compelled them to do something, they physically couldn't. They say, you have to go back to Switzerland for that. Because the data is de-identified in Switzerland, that's the only place it comes back. So really a nice data sovereignty conversation there as well. The next example is a large insurance company. This company had decided they were going to outsource and offshore all of their app maintenance, app development, data support to India, actually. And the problem is PHI data is inherent in all of those applications. And so again, they were struggling. How do I get PHI data in an application, in an offshore environment that they can leverage, but is still not going to run afoul of all the laws, rules, and regulations like HIPAA that I have to worry about? Enter data-centric security, right? By de-identifying that data, the people in India doing the outsourcing and offshoring didn't need to know who I am to be able to do their job, right? So you're able to, again, strip the sensitivity out, but still be able to democratize that data to the people that need it. A major financial services firm was the one that actually was telling me that it took them about 2 to 3 weeks to really curate data sets, to be able to get the data they needed into the right hands of the right users. And it's because of the back and forth with security, audit, and compliance of this data. I'm going to be a broken record on this slide, I realize that, but enter data-centric security, and applying those right methods that we were looking at before allowed them to get 90% faster of just getting people access to the information when they need it so that you could do your job. I was talking to someone just the other day who said, we have been arguing about this internally for a year and a half. I am about to lose my AI engineers. I'm about to lose some of my good data scientists because we're not moving fast enough. They want to go do cool stuff, and I'm not able to let them do cool stuff because I'm inhibited by all of the laws, rules, and regulations that come around with sensitive information. The one I'll go a little quick over, the large healthcare company, data breach, bad things happen when data gets breached. They called us after and said, hey, we just spent $115 million and our regulators are looking at doubling down on all of the stuff that we have to do. They used data-centric security to help mitigate some of that regulatory compliance requirements. And then finally, last but not least, and definitely one that's near and dear to my heart, I started off my career as an auditor. So yes, I've been on the other side, and I've been the one kind of poking you and asking all the stupid questions that you get asked sometime to get all the information that I need to do my job. This organization, a large credit reporting agency, said, and is actually able to get approval from PCI DSS, their credit card audit, on their credit card data audit, that they could de-scope systems for compliance if they use data-centric security. The auditor said, yes, if you take a credit card, turn it into a token, and you can't go back to that regular credit card number in that system, it's out of scope. So think about what that means. They got to de-scope $40 million worth of audit and compliance within that system because, let's take a simple example. An analytics environment, do your analytics environments care what my credit card number is? No, they care about the referential integrity of that number to be able to perform analytics. So since we cannot in an analytics environment go back to the real number and we're only using the tokens, you can operate on that data all day long. PCI DSS couldn't care less. Now, that customer service app, where I need to get back to some of the credit card information, that's still in scope, right? But that's okay. I mean, it's not this is, again, it's not a silver bullet. It's not going to erase all of the data security issues that you have or the compliance issues that you need to solve. But again, it really helps right-size that for your organization. So with that, I'm actually going to stop on one last thing. If nobody has given you the bird yet today, so I don't know how good you are at drivers. Maybe some of you got the bird on the way into the conference here today. Go stop by our booth. We have birds to give away, and I don't know how many we have left. However, I will say I also don't know how much a tariff is on these going back to the U.S., and I definitely do not want to be the one responsible for trying to take a whole bunch of birds back to the U.S. and dealing with that headache at the border. So please, please, please come help me. Come grab these birds. Come get those before we go. With that, I'm going to stop. Thank you guys so much for your time. I'll open it up for some questions as well. Do we have a microphone up here? Right up front? Oh, and one on the left? Well, it's going to be a race on the microphone, so I promise I'll come back to you.
All right, hi. So my question comes down to, when it comes to the data security and the levels with that, how do you deal with stuff that toxic combinations where two things together become sensitive, but individually they're not?
Yeah, it's an absolutely great question. This is why you have to look at the consumption needs of it, because I would go a step further and say it's really kind of a scenario-based conversation there. It's that same piece of data, that social security number that has multiple protections that you have to put in place. Sometimes it's a token to be able to maintain referential integrity. Sometimes it's a mask to be able to know the last 4 digits. And this is that exact same conversation. It's really knowing what that business consumption is and right-sizing that says, hey, in this scenario, these two pieces of data separately don't care. Together, I care very much, right? And so it really is a scenario-based, consumption-based discussion that is looking at both sides of those picture. Okay? Yeah, please.
Hi. So you had mentioned, I think in your examples, there's always this kind of back and forth between like business and security or whoever, and they run into these roadblocks. Do you have you seen any strategies or kind of whatever, something similar where, data organizations and security are working together so data organizations can get the business to better articulate, these are how we strategically use certain critical data elements. Like, these ones are key for keying and linking, for example. And so if it's the exact value or a consistently different value, it can match.
Yeah, it's actually a great question, and I would say here's the thing that I will leave you with, because I'm also out of time. You need to be BFFs, right? The security and the data teams have to come together because the security team understands the risk and the data team understands the consumption. Your security team does not know that complexity. Your security team doesn't know this, well, A plus B is sensitive, but A and B are separate. They don't know that. You are the ones that know that. And so it really is a joint conversation here to drive this. And what I am seeing, though, is that security teams, while when it came to some areas, sometimes they were like the business was able to accept risk if it was a compliance issue, because sometimes a compliance fine becomes just the cost of doing business. But no one's having that conversation around AI. So it's finding those use cases that you can come together on and say, with AI, can we just all agree that we are not going to put social security numbers in a public AI model? Like, please, can we all agree we are not going to put social security numbers or credit cards in a public AI model? And again, the answer to that is yes. So I would really look at that conversation as a use case-centric discussion of where they almost can't be a team of no anymore. So with that, again, thank you very much. Come by the booth if you do have more questions. I'll be around and happy to help address those as we finish out the day. So thank you all very much.
Okay.